Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Pitch it if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Mohamed Elmaazi joins us today. We talk about the Assange extradition hearings that resumed this week in London. Mohamed gives us the highlights of this week's proceedings with various witnesses and new charges against Assange, and he's provided continuous coverage of this case. And he is able to give us a sense of what it's like on the ground in London, reporting on these hearings, which are now being conducted with special arrangements for COVID-19. Mohamed Elmaazi is a journalist with experience in human rights law, with degrees from American University in Cairo and the SOAS. He writes for Sputnik News, he publishes the Interregnum blog, and he's been a contributor to Open Democracy, The Canary, The Gray Zone, and the Real News Network. We recorded this on September 12th, 2020. Mohamed Elmaazi's here talking to us from London. Hi, Mohamed. It's great. Thank you for taking the time, especially on a weekend, to update us on the Assange proceedings. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
For people who, you're familiar with British law, before we get started, just, real quick, if you could just go into what these proceedings are, what the Old Bailey is. The Old Bailey, to me and probably a lot of Americans and other people, is just like, we know of it from like the V for Vendetta. What is it? V for Vendetta movie. You know what I mean? The famous scene in
I do know, yeah.
V for Vendetta, yeah. So what court is this? What's it like? Where is it? And what are these legal proceedings, basically?
Well, the Old Bailey, as it's known, which is the Central Criminal Court, is based in central London in the financial district, also known as the City, which is run by the Corporation of London. If people want to learn more about that, they can watch the documentary The Spider's Web, Britain's Second Empire, which looks at the emergence of offshore tax havens, etc., and how they were developed and why they were developed. But basically, it's the financial hub of London, but of the country, really. And that's where the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, is where many serious criminal cases are held, including jury trials. And because of the problems developing with COVID and the need to find a venue for these proceedings where they could have enough time, 3 weeks, possibly 4 weeks, ultimately the Old Bailey was selected because the judge in this case and her staff were able to find that there was enough free time within the parameters that were sought by both the defense and the prosecution. And so this isn't a criminal case per se, in the sense that it is a criminal case. There's a prosecution represented there from the United States, but these proceedings are extradition hearings. So they could have theoretically just have been held in Westminster's Magistrates Court, which is where most of the hearings have been held. So the Old Bailey is being used as more than anything else, right? So that this can be held
can
as
you
a
repeat
venue.
That? There was a little bit of a glitch there. Can you just repeat that? Why the Old Bailey is being used more as a...
it's being used as a venue. It's just a location, a physical location, because of the number of weeks that are requested and the time frame. They wanted, both the defense and prosecution wanted this to begin in September. And so the judge and her staff were looking around the city, and I think even potentially outside of London, for a location that they could have these 3 to 4 weeks of extradition hearings, where within the time frame that was desired. So the Old Bailey was selected, but that's it. It's just a venue. These aren't criminal proceedings per se. These are extradition hearings, which will decide whether or not Julian Assange will be extradited to the United States, where he would face then a criminal trial based in the Eastern District of Virginia, or the Western District of Virginia.
It is the Eastern, yeah.
Eastern District of Virginia. And so that's that. These are extradition hearings. Quite often people have been referring to it as a trial. It technically isn't a trial. In a trial, you have certain rights. There's a beyond all reasonable doubt standard which must be satisfied in criminal cases and within the balance of probabilities within civil cases, or beyond the balance of probabilities within civil cases. So that's not what's going on here. These are just substantive extradition hearings. I say that the substantive hearings, as in there's not just administrative matters. This is where the meat of the matters is to be dealt with. In February was part one of the substantive hearings that was held at Belmarsh Magistrates Court. And that was where key legal arguments were being made. And now it's where key witness testimony is being heard, where they're both being examined and cross-examined by the various parties, by the defense and the prosecution.
Got it. Now, some people, because of social distancing, there are some people attending in person, but much fewer than would normally be. And there's a live stream for journalists. I know that you are on site, but were you able to actually get into the court, or are you consuming the live stream for journalists? Did you get a press pass for that?
So I got a press pass for the live stream, for the video link, which you're not allowed to share with anybody. You're not allowed to take screenshots. You're not allowed to make any audio or video recordings, all of which would be a violation of the Contempt of Court Act, and you could face criminal prosecution. I wanted to be physically in court. I wanted to have a ticket like I had last time for the February hearings, because I'm the only journalist to have attended physically every single hearing. That was until these ones restarted. And I told them that in the email to the Ministry of Justice when requesting my seat. There's no explanation given as to why you didn't get a ticket to be physically inside, although very few people have. But if it's anything like last time, what will happen is the legacy or corporate press, who presumably have been granted access, will start to taper off, because that's what happened last time as well. When I was physically there, I could see it. Plenty of people arrived on day one, and then they started to disappear as the week went on. And so I will probably try to see if I can get in, just because it's nice to be able to hear and view things from physically inside the court, which I'm used to doing for the last 18 months. So, but that being said, I found a location. It's a business building about 10 minutes away from the court, and I'm paying them to use their lounge, which is an offer that they, it's not unusual. That's something that's on offer. I happened to see a banner that offered something that seemed like reasonable rates. So I was like, okay, great. So I every morning I arrive there first. I pass by the Old Bailey. I see the protesters. I take some pictures. I send out a tweet. I make my way to the lounge, set up my laptop, hook up the Wi-Fi, and there's a specific time when you're allowed to log in. And it's between like 9:30 and 9:40. And then after 9:40, they won't let anyone in until after lunch.
Oh.
And if your connection disconnects, it's the same thing. Although that did happen with me once, and they did let me in, but they then sent an email saying like you won't let back in after these times. So I have to make sure that the laptop is perpetually connected to the internet. And what will happen is I'll be following the case. I'll be trying to send out live tweets, taking notes for potential articles, like quotes from the lawyers or from the judge or from witnesses. And, I'm not a touch typist the way my mother was. So there's a kind of difficult. She could type 100 words a minute, and she had very good spelling. I cannot type 100 words a minute. I do not have very good spelling. So I try to juggle those things, and then when there seems like there's going to be a break, then I literally run over to the court. I have to leave my computer so it remains connected, so I don't lose the connection. Luckily, there are people there who can watch it, not other journalists, but just the staff there. And then I run over. I'll try to take pictures as well, and then to see if I can interview anybody. And then I try to put out a video tweet, and then at least 2/3 of the time, the video tweets fail for some reason. It's very frustrating, which means I've got to get back and then edit and then upload them onto the computer and then tweet them out that way. And then that's basically how 8-hour days go
My
during
gosh.
the hearings. So it's intensive. They're definitely getting my employer is definitely getting their money's worth. Um, and that's the thing is I have to keep them updated, right? Because that means I'm not pitching other stories. I'm just focused on the Assange hearing. So I have to keep them updated as to what's going on and suggest that when there seems to be juicy material or something like that, I'll send them stuff to put out themselves as well.
Yeah, that's really quite a task. A lot of different skills involved, and like you said, I mean, is it really? I won't get into it too much, but is it really necessary to put those restrictions on where you can only log in, or those, and then they shut the gates, and I don't know.
Yeah, I
Particularly
mean maybe.
since
Yeah.
they
Go
had
on.
some technical issues themselves, didn't they?
Exactly. I mean, the people. I don't know if it's a private company that is being paid to manage the live stream process, or who knows. I wouldn't be surprised given how much is outsourced in this country, including within the justice system. It could be that it just makes life easier for them, right? That they're not hanging around for the entire day's worth of hearing. So, like, we'll only be around from this time to this time. But at the same time, there have been time periods during the hearings where there's a problem with the sound, and we'll text in the chat. We'll say, "Hey, there's no sound," and then so they actually have to be able to be on call to manage issues. So I that's a good question. I don't know why. And some of
Yeah.
the rules change at the last minute, like the time periods change. Where like actually this is the time period now we're going to open up because this hearing is starting late today or early today. And it's just like but it is what it is, you know what I mean? And that's another reason why it's important for me to try to get court access. But here's the thing, if I queue up because there's a long line to get into court in the morning. If I do that and I don't get in, then I potentially lost time to get to the office. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
everything is a cost benefit analysis. So we'll see. There's a number of weeks left, so I will definitely try to get in, just to get the feel of things from inside the courtroom. But normally the video link works well for us. Normally, with the Old Bailey at least, you can
Now,
hear well and see.
yeah, well, that's good. That's good because in the Belmarsh hearings, they had a separate room for journalists, right? I remember Kevin being there. You were in
I
the
was
room,
there
but
as well with
I
Kevin.
think
Yeah,
yeah, Kevin was in the journalist room, right? So
we both
so
were. Yeah,
they didn't provide that this time, or are you saying
there
that?
is. We just didn't get in without
Oh,
an
so
explanation.
okay.
There is a
So
press
there's
annex. Yeah, that's what they called it there, a press annex. Although the sound quality with the video link had constant issues.
I remember that. Yeah.
But here with the Old Bailey, what there is there's some press in the press gallery in the courtroom, and then a few seats for family. And then there's two other courtrooms apparently where some observers and some press are. So where they observe via video link,
Now,
but
what
not
can you
many.
see? Not many, right?
Yeah.
What can you see from the video link? What's the courtroom like?
You can see where the judge is sitting, and you can see the two spaces where the defense team and right next to them the prosecution are, and then it stays there. The screen stays there for 90% of the time, 99% of the time. In the morning, if when the judge speaks to Julian Assange and says, "Please state your name and a date of birth, etc., for the record," then the camera will move to the dock where he is behind a glass wall, as it were. Um, and then you'll see him for a bit, and then the camera will move back to where the advocates are and where the judge is, and that's basically what you're staring at for most of the time.
But he's not sitting at the table with his lawyers like in an American court. Normally, the defendant is right there at the table with the lawyers.
Yeah.
He's still in a
No,
separate thing, right?
no, yeah. Normally here, that's not the way it is. Although, as was shown in February, when the defense team had advocated because of the complexity of the case, and then they showed examples of other European Court on Human Rights decisions, including in one case involving Russia, a trial that was in Moscow, and other cases, they said, look, because of the complexity of the case, because of his difficulty that he was having hearing, and the fact that we're having to constantly consult with him, it would aid us greatly if he could sit with us. And in the end, the prosecution ended up saying, okay, we don't have a problem with this. And it went, and the Judge Vanessa Baretzer, had said, well, look, you know, essentially, this isn't her exact words, but she's like, I'm not bothered either way, but I don't think I actually have the authority to do this. Technically, if he leaves the dock, then he's out of custody. And this would be like making a bail application. And she's like, there's a private security firm which is managing the security there. It's up to them, and I imagine there'd have to be a whole security risk assessment, etc. I mean, security risk assessment. He's a publisher, so I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
And a
right.
journalist, so I'm not quite sure. And then the defense argued that it's like, no, actually, you have the legal authority to say he can sit with us. The next day, because this was discussed under a 2-day period, the next day the judge conceded that in fact she did have the authority, so it was clear that she was almost certain she didn't. She said, I accept I do have the rights and the legal authority to say that he can sit with you, and that this wouldn't bring him out of custody, and that both of you, the prosecution and defense, are saying that, the prosecution saying they're fine with it, and they said actually that might make things easier if, to stop the hearing stopping every 30 minutes or something. But then she still denied it. She still refused the application, which I found interesting because I was like, okay, but the day before you said that you didn't have an issue with it, presumably because you thought you didn't have the legal authority. So that's one thing where I think she did kind of show her hand, because she intimated quite clearly that she didn't have a problem with it. But anyway, we're getting a bit into the weeds. So that's the situation there. That's the situation there, and yeah, he remains in the dock.
All right. So from the start, well, I mean, I've been hearing things all week. I've heard some people talking about what happened, and the judge just said it seems to be pretty disagreeable overall. And a lot of people are saying it seems she's just completely biased. Um, I won't go any further than that, but right off the bat, the first day of this trial, something interesting happened where did they void the previous extradition order and issue a new one, rearrest him and all of that? What the heck was that about?
Okay, so the United States is entitled to issue new indictments, right? There was one indictment, and then there was a second indictment, which became the superseding indictment, and then there was a third indictment, which became the second superseding indictment. And that's just where they have the charge sheet, right? That these are the charges that we're levying against the accused, which we're saying this is the reason why we want him extradited to our country. And the only issue is that there was a deadline given by the judge for any further submissions, and the prosecution ended up filing the second superseding indictment after that deadline. It was argued by the defense that this would be unfair because they don't have enough time to address the changes, and it went back and forth, but ultimately the judge decided to accept it. She did give them the opportunity to, a couple of weeks back, to request an adjournment to deal with the second superseding indictment. But they were like, well, this is where they were arguing, and I wrote a piece where they said defense, something to the effect of defense suggests that the U.S. are seeking a delay till after the election, and that might be because of the material and revelations that might come out. I mean, who knows? But that was that environment. They chose not to request an indictment. They were given a week. Sorry, not to request an adjournment because of the second superseding indictment. They were given a week, and they chose not to. And then when it came to this the substantive extradition hearings restarting, they did end up making the request. I mean, for a number of reasons, and they put it to her that perhaps till January, might need an adjournment till next January. But the point is, she considered it and she rejected it. She said, well, you had the opportunity before and you didn't do it. And so we're going to go ahead. So now it's been Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of witness testimony, all for the defense. There have been 4 witnesses who've been called. and who've been examined and cross-examined. And three of them appeared via video link, and one of them appeared in person. And so we're really in the meat of it now. And I've written a piece on all of those. They were all for Sputnik. So if people want, they can check them out on my Twitter feed, or they can find my name via the Sputnik website, where you'll see the articles that I've written, and then you can see the four that I've written on the subject matter of the four different witnesses. So where I try to sum it up. So
right, and what we'll do is we'll link all of those specifically in the show notes too, so people don't have to search for them. Yeah, we'll do that. So, what did you think were the highlights of this week? And if you want, after that, maybe go into what you anticipate for the coming week.
So, highlights. Clive Stafford Smith, founder or co-founder of Reprieve, the US-based human rights firm Reprieve, which focused on death penalty cases, but ended up working on Guantanamo Bay detainee cases, torture accusations, cases involving extraordinary rendition. That's where people are kidnapped, typically by the CIA, and then rendered to a third party, a third state, where they're then tortured, and then people being killed by drone strikes. And families, seeking grievance because of, there were so many people who've been killed by drone strikes, not just towards the end of the Bush administration, but heavily under the Obama administration. So these kinds of cases, that this is literally their speciality. And so Clive Stafford Smith, who is a British American citizen, so he speaks with like an English accent, but he's a U.S. citizen, and he's a U.S. qualified lawyer, and that's where he's works on these cases. He was physically there, and he testified to the relevance of the WikiLeaks documents in aiding their cases, in reflecting what was going on with Guantanamo Bay, because of course they were assisting people under incredibly restrictive, sort of Kafkaesque rules, and also assisting them with these other cases involving torture and drone strikes. So there were documents, for example, that revealed the Pakistani president saying to U.S. ambassador, okay, you can kill our citizens, as it were, and we'll have to publicly denounce this at the National Assembly, but you'll know that this is just for show. Right? So because of WikiLeaks, documents by WikiLeaks, we know that, which is interesting because I wasn't aware of that was part of the documents that were published. So he spoke to the relevance of the documents, how that related to their work, and there was lots back and forth on this subject matter, and the prosecution tried to put Clive Stafford Smith that actually the entire indictment is essentially, it's not about the publishing of all these documents. It's actually, the focus is on documents published by WikiLeaks which contain the name of sources, and then there was for sort of a fierce back and forth where Clive Stafford Smith said, like, look, if you understand conspiracy trials in the United States, which I have a lot of work practice, a lot of experience with, then what happens is you have plenty of getting in all kinds of information through the back door. He gave the example of an FBI case where he defended a member of the outlaw biker gang. I can't remember exactly its name. And then how for the first 3 days it was just FBI testimony and experts just discussing that gang and its entire history and all kinds of murders they knew or suspected that they were involved in around the country, et cetera, which all of which had nothing to do with the specific charges against his client, right? And so that's what you're saying. He's saying, you're saying that Assange won't be facing, that this isn't about all the other things, the Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs, the Guantanamo Bay files, but I'm telling you how conspiracy trials in the United States work in practice. So it was a strong back and forth, actually. It's been a while since I've seen something like that in court. Then that issue, which keeps being raised by the prosecution, that this is just about, revealing documents that revealed the identity of sources, informants, sources for the CIA and for the U.S. military, which even was pointed out, even during that exchange, or that if you read other charges, like one of the charges refers to identity of informants, but other charges just refers to the possession of classified documents. That's it. And other charges, dissemination of classified documents. It doesn't refer to identities of sources. So even on the face of it, there's a dispute. So that means you already have this argument about even what he's being charged with. And this then went to other expert witnesses. You had a professor of journalism who used to be a long-time investigative journalist in the United States. You had a professor of political science, a British professor of political science and international security, Professor Rogers for peace studies at the University of Bradford, who discussed how he believed it was quite clear that this is, or there's substantial evidence to believe that the charges here against Julian Assange are politically motivated, and that's important because there's the defendants are arguing, the defense team is arguing that as a matter of law under the Anglo-American Extradition Treaty, you cannot extradite where the offense is a political offense.
Mm-hmm.
He also argued that Julian Assange has clear political views, which is something that the defense team obviously wants to push out there, that he has a clear, coherent, like, political views, which were expressed sort of, there's a strong, like, libertarian aspect to it, and so they said, okay, it wouldn't fall into the mainstream political views of maybe traditional conservative or liberal, but that they exist. And so that was his witness testimony. And then you had Trevor Tim from the Freedom of the Press Foundation, who is a lawyer by qualification, and that he completed law school, but is specialized in media freedom and media and journalism. And he discussed how, which is something that a different professor on journalism also discussed, how all the activities that are mentioned in the charge sheet that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have gotten up to are the kinds of things that investigative reporters get up to, and specifically national security reporters or those working on national security, including handling classified documents, inducing sources to provide them classified documents,
Assisting them, yeah.
And there was a lot of, and in fact, it was put to him by the prosecution, Professor Trevor Tim. Well, are you not aware of these 5 affidavits by a U.S. attorney, Mr. Kronberg, which says that this is not a political prosecution, which says that they don't agree that Julian Assange is a journalist, that they wouldn't go against journalists, that there's rules about the guidance for U.S. prosecutors that explicitly say that you cannot go after people for political purposes. Why did you not include that in your expert report if you're meant to be an unbiased expert? Because under the British rules here, if you're submitting evidence as an expert, even if the defense are calling you, you have to sign an oath that basically says you will not seek to mislead the court, but you also have to, you're expected to be unbiased, as it were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't, and so there he tried to do this with each witness, to suggest that each witness was biased, right? That, like, essentially you're here as a biased individual to advocate for Assange. And his response was, well, for one thing, I don't base my assessment on Department of Justice press releases. I base it on my review of the indictment itself, which I thought was a great answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of caught the prosecution. So he said, and then number 2, he said, I'm happy to discuss it now. We can discuss those statements now. It's just that there's limited time. I was asked to look at specific issues, in particular, why we think this would be a threat to media freedom, why we think that this is a dangerous prosecution, why we think it's in violation of the First Amendment, and the kinds of activities. Another point he made, when it kept being put to him, there was a Guardian editorial from the Guardian newspaper, which was read to him, saying, well, look, the Guardian says that they condemn the publication of the identity of sources, which, by the way, that whole issue is in dispute as well, but I won't get into that right now.
Okay.
And they read a very critical editorial from the Guardian, which keeps being read over and over again. And they said, so I put it to you, like, what say you essentially about this? And he's like, look, this isn't, you know, people aren't a journalist. It's not about whether or not you're perceived to be a journalist by the US government, or whether they agree with your editorial judgment, or whether the New York Times or the Guardian agrees with your editorial judgment. He says, I may have some issues with certain editorial decisions by WikiLeaks, just as I would have some issues of editorial decisions by the Guardian. He said the issue under the First Amendment is whether or not your activity is journalistic activity, not whether you are certified by some kind of body and officially recognized as being a journalist. That's not the issue as far as the First Amendment is concerned, insofar as the history of case law. And he says this goes back to the founding of the U.S., even under George Washington, or, he says, when you had people who were pamphleteers,
Yeah.
right, handing out pamphlets. So that was very interesting, and he kept his cool, and the prosecution kept seeking to try to get people to say, are you suggesting that the prosecutors are acting in bad faith? Because, right? Because, and which would be a rabbit hole, right? If you start saying yes, because he thought that Professor Trevor Tim at one point said yes, but he didn't. He said, well, it sounds like you're saying that because they have these guidelines, right? Do you accept they have these guidelines? It's like, I accept that they have these guidelines not to act politically. So I said, so it would seem to follow, based on what you're saying, that they're acting in bad faith, wouldn't it? And he said, well, that's a very good question, and perhaps that needs to be looked at and investigated. And then the response was, so what evidence do you have that they're acting in bad faith? And he answered, well, I never said that they were. I just said that's a good question. It's worth looking into, which is good, for people not to try to be clever on the stand, to just make the case that you're asked by whichever party to make. And if you don't know or you don't understand what's being asked, to just come back and say, I don't understand the question. So I thought he held up very well and made those key points. Oh, and finally, a point that was finally made that I haven't heard made yet, also by Trevor Tim, in terms of the release of the publication of sources and informants' identities, right? He made the point. He said, look, that after WikiLeaks had published information, there was a law that was actually debated in the U.S. Congress to criminalize the publication of identity of sources, and it failed. And he says that tells us two things. One, within the eyes of the U.S. Congress, it was not already a criminal offense to publish the names and identities of sources/informants. And two, that there wasn't enough consensus to make it so, to make it criminal. And so finally, that's something that, needed to be addressed, because whatever you may think about publishing the name or identity of a source, the question is, are publishers around the planet legally obligated, or journalists legally obligated, to protect the identity of people working with the CIA or the U.S. military? Like, I never understood that from the get-go when it was first being argued that this is about the identities of sources, because so he's an Australian citizen, he doesn't work for the CIA. Like, what's the argument here? So that was finally addressed for the first time that I'm aware of, where that
that's
point
a
was
really
made.
good. That's a good one. I mean, that itself seems like it could blow the prosecution's argument right out of the water.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So that's where we're at. That's a key. That's I hope I haven't taken too long. I'm sure I have, but that's a key. Just a roundup of the last from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, as people may know, didn't go ahead properly because it was the court was adjourned till Monday after it was discovered that the husband of one of the lawyers on the U.S. government side was exhibiting symptoms that might have been COVID. So the lawyer had to be tested. And so there's a whole issue of like, okay, well, we can't go ahead because if that person is actually infected, then the rest of us could be infected. And then there's a number of lawyers on the defense team who are at risk. So everything was adjourned until Monday, and then we discovered about midday on Friday that the tests came back negative. Thank God, because if they'd come back positive, that could have just caused all kinds of delays.
Right.
And I know they want to deal with what things need to be dealt with, because you can imagine all the video link arrangements, people from different countries. Some people may be buying plane tickets, and if you came from a country that you had to isolate from for 14 days, when you first arrive in the UK, that's the whole thing, and then it just messes things up. You know what I mean? People have time. There's a witness list, timetable. We don't know what it is. It hasn't been given to journalists, but it exists. So it doesn't necessarily work always in the defense's case. I know some people think it's good if you have delays, but if it's just a brief, sometimes these things just mess things up. They mess up the flow because there's
Yeah.
lots to get through to.
Yeah, it's actually it's very fragile. It could go off the rails at any given time. And it seems to me, as long as the defense is prepared, they've they've gained a little momentum and attention right now, and it's probably good if it continues. But I just have two more sort of quick questions for you. One is, I don't know if you've been looking at the mainstream media, the big corporate media coverage. I just wondered what your impression was on how they're covering it. If you have had time to see what the New York Times, the Guardian, and well, I don't know, CNN and Fox and so on, and I guess Australian media, what you think about how they're covering it.
To be honest, I can't answer that because I've been just so busy with
Yeah,
what
I
I've been
imagine.
doing. I haven't really been looking. There were a couple of times, in previous hearings where I've been able to look, but the last week, what little free time I've had, I haven't gone through. I am looking at someone named Megan Specia on her Twitter. She's a reporter and editor at New York Times International, and she's noting to somebody that she was in the Old Bailey on Monday for the first day of the trial and then sitting in the overspill live stream area with the rest of the press, except for a small handful who were next door in the courtroom. We all viewed it by video, she writes. Which I find kind of frustrating that this person, who I'm sure she could well be a very good journalist, but why did Megan Spacey, a reporter and editor at the New York Times International, get in, and Mohamed Elmaazi, a reporter at Sputnik and the Canary, who has been covering every single hearing for the last 18 months, physically being there, including when COVID meant that there's almost nobody else there. He didn't get a seat inside the court. So it's not like the New York Times has been covering this extensively. They haven't been. They're a bit better now. But anyway, that's just like a pet peeve because I recall last time around being told that UK press would get preference
Hmm.
in February, and they were saying that specifically. So it's but anyway, like I said, I'll try again. And quite frankly, the setup as it's been has had its advantages because I've been able to come in and out of my lounge when I'm typing up, while other people probably feel more stuck inside the court building. So
Yeah, and just the
there's
all
that.
the hassle of getting in
So
and out of those places.
ex-
Yeah,
exactly, exactly.
yeah,
So I should see it as a bit of a silver lining, but there is a bit of you know, bit of an irritation there that it's like. But anyway, moving on, moving forward.
yeah. There are a couple of documentaries you mentioned. I just wanted you to mention those, and I'll also link them in the show notes that you found particularly valuable. If you just want to pitch
Uh,
those real quick, and you're in one of them.
yes. Yeah, so I'm in one's called Journalism on Trial, the UK and Press Freedom, where I make a very brief appearance. And then there's another one, which is good, actually, that looks at, okay, there's the case of Julian Assange, but they also look at, wider surveillance, targeting of journalists here in the UK. And so that's important. It helps to paint a good picture for people, wider context for people. Then there's the war on Julian Assange. Then there's the war on journalism, the case of Julian Assange. People can find both of these literally not just via the show notes, via YouTube. They're free to watch. That one is filmed. They're both documentary shorts. The first is 30 minutes. The war on journalism is 40 minutes, and that is made by Juan Pasquarelli, who is a video journalist who's worked with WikiLeaks for the last 10 years. And that is good. That one, if you want to get a quick dose of what exactly this case is about, to when it gets taken down to its bare bones, that's a good one. If for an individual who wants to kind of get a reminder as to the kinds of things that were being published by WikiLeaks, as well as if you want to share it with other people and say that, okay, this is what's at stake. I think both of
Gotcha.
those documentary shorts are good for people to share, not just for themselves, but to say if somebody says, isn't this about the DNC leaks, or is this about Sweden, or all those other things, which of course these cases have absolutely nothing to do about with whatsoever. They're not in the indictment. They've got nothing to do with those things. It's about the release of documents in 2010 and 2011, known as the Iraq War Logs, the Afghanistan Diaries, the Guantanamo Bay files, and the diplomatic cables.
Cables, right. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking time. I really appreciate the on the ground view of what's going on. That's I don't know if that's just me, but I think other people also sort of interested in just the vibe of what's going on around there. And if I can get more of your time, I'll check back with you later on this too, maybe next week or the week after. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
My
Please,
pleasure.
please let everybody know how to follow you, how to find your work, and all of that.
I'm on Twitter at M for Mohammed, and then Elmaazi. That's my last name, ELMAAZI. Or you could type in Mohamed Elmaazi into Twitter search. And yeah, I have published with Open Democracy, The Grey Zone a bit, The Canary a lot, and now largely, although not entirely, with Sputnik UK and a few other outlets. So, but I post all the articles I write anyway via Twitter. So, yeah.
Right. And you still have the interregnum, or
That's my blog. Yeah, I always forget to finish
okay.
that. That's my own website, theinterregnum.net, where whenever possible I'll publish there, including sometimes just articles I've written elsewhere. I'll just put them there as well, because I know I've got subscribers so that they'll see them. They might not necessarily go to the other websites.
Got it. All right. Thanks again, Mohammed, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Mohamed Elmaazi. Follow him on Twitter at melmaazi, MELMAAZI, and find his work at Sputnik News, The Canary, and on his blog, theinterregnum.net. Around the Empire podcast is independent media, and your support's really important. Please pitch in patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. There are lots of ways to find and listen to the syndicated audio podcast on any mobile podcast app, on the website, aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.